here we are again. This is the gorgeous, the lovely, the beatific Mark Laxer. Isn't it funny that in a sexist society, we are finally understanding that we've got to call men gorgeous too? Am I getting this right? I don't think I am somehow. But
it's interesting because it may be that our session today is talking about disinformation, and if you keep repeating it, I may believe it. So
oh, you are so gorgeous, Mark. What can I say? Oh dear. No. Mark is a celebrated author and a cerebrated author. He's a man who's thought about things, and we've had so much fun over the last couple of years getting to know each other through the medium of YouTube. And we have to be led back to the same place every time, which is here we are on social media. Social media. Why is it called social media? It should be called anti-social media, most of it. If I could afford a Lamborghini, would I drive it into a swimming pool just so I could get more subscribers to my channel? I wouldn't. Would you? Would you drive a Lamborghini into a swimming pool just to get more viewers for your channel, Mark? Tell us the truth now. Reach into
no, definitely not. A Ferrari, definitely, yes.
Yeah, Testarossa. What a strange name that is. So we both have a concern about what the former, it's not late yet, the former president, Donald J. Trump, called fake news. He was very big on that, and spread quite a lot of it, as far as I can tell. Disinformation, misinformation, propaganda, and all of these horrors. And I was going to embark upon this voyage with a little story. I think we'll tell the Hill and Knowlton story, because this is a perversity of chance that I was actually called by the managing director, Martin Sorrell, of WPP, who or at that time owned Hill and Knowlton, PR advertising type people. And Hill and Knowlton had actually dropped Scientology as a client because they didn't want to deal with anything quite that ugly. And Martin Sorrell, and I had no idea who he was because, as you know, I'm a bear of little brain. I spent an hour on the phone with this hugely important man with no idea who he was, and charged nothing to say, if I were you, I wouldn't get into litigation with Scientology if you want to save money at any point. And Hill and Knowlton I think they paid a settlement to Scientology because they just walked out on them and said, we're not working for you anymore. I don't know if they called them anti-religious hate campaigners, which is what Scientology tends to call people, but it wouldn't have been far off the truth. And at the same time, Hill and Knowlton were perfectly willing to prep a witness for the hearing that would lead to the first Iraq war. These were congressional hearings, and nobody has ever punished anybody at Hill and Knowlton for the testimony, which was about a 15-year-old girl, Kuwaiti girl, who testified under oath that she had witnessed them pitching the premature babies out of the incubators in Kuwait City Hospital. A baby story, which is how wars begin. And the reality is she was actually shopping with her dad in New York on the day that the Saddam Hussein's Iraqis went into that hospital, if indeed they went into the hospital when they went into Kuwait City. And she was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador. And Hill and Knowlton were perfectly open about, well, we needed a war. So what's wrong with that? I think that people who do things like that should be sent to prison. I think causing a war that leads to tens of thousands of deaths is a bad thing. What do you think?
So I have a question about that. Thank you for those thoughts. I think in terms of holding people accountable, it's important maybe in a court of law to determine what their intent was. So if they, and sometimes it's really hard to determine whether it's Trump or any other president or any other prime minister or leader out there. Trump certainly didn't invent this stuff. He's just really kind of good at it. So does someone know what the facts are and they're twisting it, or do they were they duped and they just believed misinformation? In which case, my question to you is, are they as culpable if they don't know the truth?
Well,
I think that's really important to determine.
I do. And in this case, Hill and Knowlton were employed by the Kuwaiti government to make up a story that would lead to support for Kuwait against Iraq. And it most certainly worked. It echoes the Belgian baby story of 1914, where the British public were told through the media, a blast of media, that German troops were chopping the hands off babies. And after the First World War, there was a US government commission, there was a Belgian government commission, found no evidence of baby hand chopping off. And an MP, a member of parliament in Britain called Eric Ponsonby, wrote a book, which okay, yes, I admit I've read, because I'm that kind of person. Very odd, really. Why would you do that? And he found the man who'd invented the story, who was a colonel in British military intelligence, who thought it was hilarious. He said, I've had thousands of letters from people wanting to adopt these handless babies. So, yes, culpability. I think the first part is this. Let's get Latin about this. Actus reus and mens rea. Did the person commit the act? Did Hill and Knowlton suborn perjury, I think is the correct term. Did they persuade a 15-year-old girl to lie? Yes. So they did the act. What was their intention? Now, mens rea, were they motivated to do this in some way? And is there any excuse? And the excuse would be, if they were insane, they couldn't be held responsible for the mens rea, for the intention. Maybe they were insane, but they'd have to plead that in court. I think there should have been an investigation into the investigation, because when somebody tells such a terrible lie, I always have this thing that you first of all try the reality, what happened, and then you look at the motivation in mitigation. So did they commit the crime of suborning perjury? Yes, they did. They persuaded a witness to lie before a congressional committee. That is suborning perjury. It's a criminal offense. Yet it wasn't even mentioned that they should be prosecuted.
Right. So I think that the path that you're taking is very important to pursue. I have it's related, but a slightly different starting point, really.
Yeah.
And that is whether one knows one's intent, what someone's intent is. Do they know the truth? Were they just making it up, or have they been duped with misinformation? It sort of reminds me that question, that path reminds me of an experience I had some years ago, where in graduate school at University of Pittsburgh, Western Pennsylvania, I had a 3-week stint in graduate school because I dropped out. And I like to think, John, that the first cult that I did get involved with took 7.5 years to extricate myself. And the second cult took 3 weeks to drop out of graduate school, which I did. And I had a nice scholarship, and I said goodbye to it. Oh, wow. I left and became a writer, among other things.
We've both made that mistake.
Yes. And so that was an interesting educational journey, if you will. So what memories it sparks for me was in the early weeks of that University of Pittsburgh MFA in writing program. There was a philosophy that had sort of taken over the department called deconstructionism. And very often, if I could just get political here for a moment, very often the idea of disinformation, you had mentioned Donald Trump. We could talk about other presidents. We could talk about people on the right.
I did not have sex with that woman. Sorry.
We talk about sort of this fascist tendencies and people on the right in the political spectrum, or I can certainly speak of the United States, using disinformation to fool the public. Well, I also I would say that that's something we should be a bit concerned about.
Mm.
I will also say the people on the left um, are perhaps equally, or not, maybe not equally, but largely,
Mm.
yeah, they're involved as well in this. In that, in my experience, it was fire from the left. It was these philosophers from France, deconstructionists,
Derrida, derision.
Jacques Derrida and Foucault, and basically what I'm trying to say here is, as graduate students, we had it pounded in our head that there is no truth. This is fire from the left now. This is not the crazies on the right,
Yeah, this is
who are not every day, but often a bit over the top. This is crazies from the left who are at times a bit over the top, and they're trying to, I mean, people in the program were getting depressed. They stopped writing. They were confused. And this is our, this is where our, great writers, they go through the universities, uh, and they get inculcated in these values, these thoughts, and they were teaching words have no meaning. There is no such thing as truth. There is no such thing, John, as reality. And having been through a cult and having been, if you will, brainwashed or have been existing for several years before that in a disinformation bubble, which I think is sort of how we define cults in part.
Yeah.
I said to these professors, I just sort of looked at them and was hiding a bit of a grin within myself. And I said, okay, that's all well and good. But if I walk up to you and stand in front of you with an 18-pound block of cement, and then I let go of it, there is this thing called gravity, and that cement block, as it approaches your foot, there will be pain, and you may like break one of your toes. I said, I'm not going to do that. But the concept of it is that is what I call reality. And you can have all your rhetoric and your pedagogy and your leftist bullshit, or your rightist bullshit, just another way to manipulate humans. And I come back to what I call physical reality. And then you have these new age, wonderful, fun people, many of them where I live, many of whom are my close friends here in Vermont, who say there is no such thing as physical reality. There's this quantum universe, and there's any particle could be anywhere at any time. And that's what Heisenberg said. Just by observing a particle, you kind of shift where it is.
Uncertainty principle, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm a bit blabbing. I apologize for that. But I guess my point is that there's some deeper philosophical questions that we can ask ourselves as a society, or in a university class, or even with younger folks, about, if you want to fact check something, if someone says, there were a lot of people at my rally and it was very obvious that there weren't, just as an example.
Fake photos.
Yeah, and people say, well, sir, with all respect, we have evidence. We have like 1,500 people each who took photos, and people who are your children, your friends, all say you're wrong. And that person, then the powerful person, doubles down and says same thing.
They're alternative people and alternative children.
and they keep doubling down. What happens, as I see it, is after a while, people are susceptible, and they think, well, maybe they could be right. And I think Elon Musk was doing that like last night, or just putting out a crazy tweet about some crazy conspiracist thing about a very tragic thing that happened recently. And he's got 100 million followers on Twitter. How many of those people don't have the ability to think critically or just accept things, or they accept it because they want to accept it, even though part of them knows that that's bullshit?
Yeah.
But for me, John, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, it comes down to physical reality and evidence. And I think various societies around the world need a good fact-checking department.
It's very interesting. I think that there are some very good fact-checking departments now. There are a lot of serious people. Then, of course, you get into the conspiracy theories about fact-checking departments. So if you, for example, look at a group like Bellingcat, who have no doubt that there is no doubt that they have unearthed information that was beyond the intelligence services and beyond the media. They have found things out along the way in the Middle East and in Ukraine, indeed, along the way, that were not known. But then there is, there are people investigating them and saying, but there are people involved with them who have been involved with the intelligence services. And you go, well, that's not really surprising, is it? That people who've been trained in intelligence gathering should break away from the intelligence services, a few of them, like John le Carre did, and point the finger of, is that the finger of blame or the finger of scorn? I can't remember, but they should point the finger of blame at, and to say, oh, well, this person used to be in, and you go, well, that's very interesting. But the fact that an intelligence, and around we go, that I could not agree more with you that our university system has been invaded by a series of absurdities, which do make it very much a disinformation bubble. Postmodernism, deconstruction, these are bizarre ideas. It's like turning back, going back to the 1920s and looking at the work of John Watson, who gave us behaviorism, and B.F. Skinner became his famous disciple. And the idea was, you can't know anything about the mind. It's a black box. You can know what goes into it and what comes out of it. And then neurologists came along and started saying, oh, this is going on inside the mind. And psychologists came along. And we look back at this and it's as if John Watson was the Wizard of Oz. Why did anybody believe this? I have the same feeling about Freud, having, explored Freud with a certain depth and his life, read thousands of pages about him and by him, and come to, I can't understand why anybody ever believed him. All children want to seduce their parents, the seduction theory, which he'd later say, I had to withdraw that because people wouldn't have believed the other things I said. He actually said this, in a letter, that he still believed that all infant children are trying to have sex with one of their parents and kill the other one, which is a basis for human psychology. Is he didn't speak to his own dad for 2 years, I'm told, because he was sure that his father must have sexually abused him. That's a little bit.
So John, do we call that, I'm sorry to interrupt, do we call that projection?
Yeah, we might do, yeah.
I don't know.
And that's before the movies had even invented the projector. He was so ahead of his time.
Right.
So you take a principle for one field, and of course, yes, we got relativity theory from Einstein about the big world and the huge world and how that's moving. Things are relative to each other, and that caught on among philosophers of not particularly large brain. They then get in.
Right. I mean, Einstein could well have been talking about particles, not necessarily humans.
Yeah, and he was largely talking about stars and galaxies and quite big things, and where Mercury was going to go, the transit of Venus, this kind of thing. But then you had the small scale stuff with Niels Bohr and Heisenberg
particles,
and Schrödinger, Copenhagen interpretation, and these ideas are then transferred as metaphors. So relativity, oh, everything's relative. I don't think that's what Einstein was quite saying, that your opinion is as good as mine. And Einstein's a good example of this, because in terms of truth, his view of relativity was a lot more developed than mine. No doubt about that. And the thought that therefore I can have an opinion that is of equal value to his, if we put it on the scales of truth about relativity, no, I can't. And so this kind of dreadful new age idea that everybody's opinion is in reality is simply what your opinion is. No, there is a measurable universe, and even something like quantum entanglement is measurable. The Bell theorem, you can see how it's happening, but now it's become, we're all little packets of quanta, or we're all little electrons, or some mad series of metaphors where people, at the same time that Derrida was coming up, Korzybski had already put forward the idea that the map is not the territory, the word is not the thing itself, and that we have to be very careful about, because as Kant said, so I'm told, we live in the map. We live in our own personal construction of reality. Our interpretation and perception of reality is distinct, but that doesn't mean that reality isn't the same. It means that we're experiencing it differently, and to then assert, and this is what's put Russia into Ukraine. This isn't just an abstract thought. This is Alexander Dugin. This is the man who's telling Putin what to think. And you can see him on video saying, we have postmodernism now. Our truth is different to your truth. And it's like, yeah, if I strike this match, it will set fire to things, whether I'm in Russia or in Scotland. So we come into this, people who are trying to project themselves into a metaphysical universe, an abstraction, a set of abstractions, as if it were the truth. And they're very, very dangerous.
I totally agree. And
Steve Bannon being
me,
another example.
I'm sorry, say that last bit again, please.
Steve Bannon being another example of this. People who live in or the Robert and Rebecca Mercer.
Indeed, it strikes me as being a huge vulnerability of our species, that in a sense, what I'm thinking about what I'm about to say, and it's a vulnerability, but it's also something very beautiful. And that is, there's in the human psyche a very powerful propensity to favor the imagination, and the imagination versus physical phenomenon. When you play those two off one another, let's just say you live wherever you live, and you sort of have this semi-drab existence, in that you got to commute to work, and there's all these people, and it's stressful, and then you behind on your bills, and in a sense, to build a fantastical universe and believe that is way more interesting, that for some people, than the physical reality. Like, oh gosh, I'm going to die, and then I won't have my consciousness. I will cease to be as whoever I am.
Somebody else will drive my Lamborghini.
Someone else will drive my Lamborghini. And, my girlfriend left me for someone else, or whatever the issues are, or like, I'm now whatever 60 years old or so, and it's like my body, I still do all these great things, but it creaks a little bit, lower back, and there's pain sometimes. Some people have shoulder pain. Everyone has some pain somewhere. There's emotional pain. I'm not trying to sound too whiny here across the puddle, but sometimes I think it was the Buddha who purportedly said, life is suffering. existence is suffering, or for the humans and maybe for animals in general. It's all a bit of a rough road. And we do have this amazing capability to make shit up in our heads. And that could be very beautiful. We could write a song, or we could imagine that really I'm a beautiful bluebird soaring through
Gorgeous,
the
Mark. What can I say?
rah, rah, rah.
Oh, what a lovely
Yeah,
song.
keep saying that. So I think it becomes, and I think rightly so, John. I think when people are young, people's imaginations are encouraged, and I certainly encourage that in my kids and in myself. Um, I did hit a wall some years ago where my imagination was, there was no checks, there's no guardrails on it, and that's when I was in a cult.
Mm,
What I think of now, I didn't think of it then in that sense, but I was part of a what I consider, it gradually became this, a destructive cult. It didn't start as a destructive cult.
mm,
It started, in my mind, as more of a benign cult, a
mm,
personality cult around a very charismatic, fun, brilliant person.
mm.
But I let my imagination fly. Um, and that can be, imagination can lead to dark places, is my point.
And it is where we live. We live inside the story. I don't remember the exact words, but I often refer to it. The opening passage of Charles Dickens' David Copperfield. It remains to be seen if I shall be the hero of my own life.
Yeah.
Something like that. I'm sure Spike will put the actual Dickensian words up. And that's a really good question, because the self is the center of narrative gravity. That's the way that Claude Daniel Dennett, who wrote Consciousness Explained Away, about which I have made many nasty quips. It has some great things in it, that book, but it doesn't actually explain consciousness. I was more confused at the end than I was at the beginning. But the self is the center of narrative gravity. I'm at the middle of my own story in more, the camera's on me, the spotlight's on me, and people will put themselves into the story, and then they have feelings of knowing, what William James, the great psychologist, called noesis. They are certain that it is this way. And so we get people who, if you mention the word Armageddon to them, they go, because they're Jehovah's Witnesses, or they were at some point. Or people come to believe elaborate fables and fairy stories, and they then sell them as politics or economics
or religion.
Or religion. Now, religion is the one that we've thought about in those terms, but with economics, it's quite interesting. There are still people who believe it's a science. Sorry, science. When you actually approach it and pull at it, it's made of cotton wool. We don't know what's happening. We don't know how to control economics. The attempts to do it. Look at what happened under Yeltsin in Russia, with an American economist advising him. They managed to screw the country up completely. And this has been a pattern. We've seen austerity here, which has produced absolutely nothing. How on earth we were able to survive through 2 years of most people not working, having bankrupt. We went through the hedge fund scandal in 2008, where rapacious people had actually pulled all of the money out of the system for their own good, and then had it paid to them again by governments who've not actually regulated. Hedge funds are big business again. So we see these strange fantasies that people invest in, these get rich quick schemes, and the fairy tales that come behind them, which become dogma, they become doctrine. And a cult is a group that follows a leader or a doctrine. That's what the word fundamentally means. It's come to have negative meanings over the last century or so, but it's not what it originally meant. The cultus, the culture, the cultivation, this is all from the same term. And here we are living in a society that is, I'm reading a book by Carl D. Marcy, who's a psychiatrist or a neuroscientist or something like that, who's been studying social media, and he puts forward the idea that the average American now spends 11 hours a day on some form of media. 77 hours a week inside the story, which is the story being told through drama and fiction, but also the story that's being told through news and edutainment and all of this stuff, to the point where I think people don't have enough downtime away from the blast of information to actually think, to actually come to conclusions. They become swept away on, vessels like QAnon or postmodernism or the cancel culture. Or a friend of mine said, a good friend of mine, a really clever guy, said to me the other week that he was woke because you're either woke or you're a fascist. Those are his exact words. And I'm sort of, well, I'm not woke and I'm not a fascist. Oh dear. Where does that leave me? This polarized world. You're with us.
If you're on Twitter, based on how you configure your feed, you're either going to get fire from the left or fire from the right. I mean, there's no middle ground in today's social media. There's no, at least in the United States, there doesn't seem to be any room for a centrist, someone who has maybe kind of reasonable view. No, I don't know, reasonable doesn't sound quite right. I shouldn't use that. But
they may have considered views. They may have views that have not been dictated to them. They may have arrived at their own conclusions. There could be a few people out there. I certainly would never describe myself as left or right. I never have. I don't wish to be part of those groups. I believe in democracy. I believe that to get to a true democracy, we are going to have to grow up. That's my fundamental idea. And
yeah, no, I'm all for that. I sort of looking at our discussion here today, and I sort of think maybe it's just amazing we have any areas in our thoughts and our communications that are not pure dystopian disinformation. Maybe it's amazing that we've gotten as far in a positive way as we have, just based on our history as a species, because maybe we are, people talk about, the humans, how do we set ourselves apart from the elephants or, chimpanzees or dolphins or whatever? And maybe often I hear like, we're the knowledge primate or whatever. Maybe we are the disinformation hominid.
Yeah, and I mean, my friend Yuval.
And by the way, I have to interrupt. You want to buy a bridge? I got a great price.
Does it go up though? Because I only want bridges that go up.
Whatever goes up also comes down.
I don't want ones that go across any abysses or anything like that.
This is floating. It floats in the air.
No, that sounds good.
My belief. Yeah.
Can my wife
for you? You got a special price.
Oh, if I buy in the next 27 minutes, I get it at a special offer, yeah, reduced.
I just don't think we're particularly reality-based species.
No, I mean, I was going to say, Yuval Noah, my extraordinarily good friend and colleague, his PhD thesis was called The Religious Ape. And I think he got two aspects of human behavior, serious ones there. I would say also that we are, where we go wrong is we become ill-tempered apes, we become angry apes, we become vengeful apes, become apes who, because of our disappointments in life, wish to wreak vengeance upon others and conceive ourselves to be part of an imaginary community. And it's imaginary, where a few years ago I was talking to a Trump supporter who told me he was a patriot, and I said, let's look the word up, and he hadn't ever actually looked it up. And it's sort of, well, would you be willing to give your life to save the Democrats who live in the US, because if you're a patriot, then it's the nation that you support. So putting aside whether you'd give up your life, patriotism, for your country, patrie, would you give up your life to the immigrants who actually have proper papers? Would you give up your life for African Americans? Would you give up your life for Hispanics? Which group? Because as a patriot, you'd give up your life to keep and save the whole of that imaginary community that you are spending most of your time on Twitter attacking. That it's not patriotism. I think Socrates, Montaigne, and Charlie Chaplin all said they were patriots of the whole world. They were patriots of humanity. That's what they believed in. And when you start getting to these, religious or national boundaries, I'm better than you because I'm, this is my skin color, or this is my gender, or I'm better than you because my ancestors came from Germany, I'm better than you for whatever reason. These ways of separating ourselves, they're all imaginary. They're all, that's if you invert the postmodern lens, then yes, people are living in that, but no, they shouldn't be. We should be actually trying to be, you use the word reasonable, rational. We should try to understand things so that the future will be better, rather than, two angry groups of Stone Age human beings yelling at each other through obscenities at each other through megaphones. I saw this on the television, groups that were ostensibly left or right in the United States standing within a few feet of each other and yelling obscenities through megaphones. Again, okay, yeah. Right. What is it that differentiates the chimpanzee from the human being? We've got megaphones.
I'm not sure that that's actually quite a difference. The whole concept of tribalism and having a dimension by which you define your tribe, maybe that's the color of your skin,
or your socks,
or your color of your socks, or in Dr. Seuss, it was those with stars on yours.
Yes, and look what happened to him.
Indeed. I do think chimpanzees have similar things going on amongst their groups.
Yes, and I think the work of particularly Frans de Waal, which I've been fascinated by for 30 years now, is very relevant about the morality of chimps and bonobos and gorillas, orangutans, our close relatives. We're there very much as a human version of it. And I keep coming back to this point. We need to mature. We need to see the consequences of how we're behaving, see where it will inevitably lead if we are hate mongers, if we are forever attacking our fellows. It will lead down a very difficult path called
it has
annihilation.
It has led down.
It continues to,
path, and it continues to. So maybe I think I grew up in the late 60s where there was this sense of hope and sense of change in the air. Maybe it was just the music, but as I get older,
maybe it's the time of year, and maybe it's the time of man, as Joni Mitchell put it in that lovely stock.
Yeah. Now I see. I've seen many hopes of a changing society sort of dashed. But I do think that hope is not gone. I think reaching out to the younger generation and trying to open people's eyes and having them see fact versus imagination and have them understand that guardrails in religions, in tribes, in any organization, any group of humans is a good thing. As someone once said in their first book, fly east, fly west, but don't fly into the cuckoo's nest.
Yes, and we should all, I think that's good advice. We should all avoid cuckoo's nests as often as we can, and realize that in fact cuckoo's nests are being manufactured for us. That, you know, the simple notions of advertising that if you use our product, you will live in a glorious utopia of healthy skin. And I've been working for the last year or two and towards and away from a book about belief, based upon Voltaire's premise that those who believe absurdities will commit atrocities. And one of the areas of belief, it's seeing when we are fed information as if it were true. So let's home in on a very specific example in the United Kingdom. If somebody is diagnosed with type 2 diabetes in this country, they will standardly, and there may be some change in the last year or so, but standardly, if they go to the doctor, they're told to go onto a low-fat diet. This is the thing that will sort their problem out. They're also told that they shouldn't be eating so much sugar, which is absolutely true. But there is no science behind this. There were no medical studies behind this, and medical studies have now been done and have shown that probably a relatively medium fat diet would be better for you. When we get into looking at vitamin supplements and mineral supplements, all sorts of ideas have been promoted. But in fact, all that these things will treat is a deficiency in those things. So if you don't have enough vitamin C, it's a good idea to take some, but you'll get scurvy. You will know that you've got a vitamin C deficiency. And the same with the other things. I had a guy stayed in my house and told me he was taking 10 grams a day of vitamin C. And because I had 9 years in Scientology, I'm very good at doing the wooden face. You know, I really learned how to do it. And I just went, you're doing what? 10 grams of vitamins, of a strong acid onto your stomach lining. Have you got ulcers yet? From where it's burned through the lining of your stomach. And what could the possible benefit be if you measure? There is an easy scientific test. You measure your urine to see how much, if you stop taking vitamin C for a few days, how much vitamin C is in your urine. And what will happen is that, you know, your 10 grams, about 9.5 of it is going to be coming out the other end. Your body is trying to get rid of it. So we come down to that's one way of assessing truth, the scientific way. And of course, if you stop taking a huge dose of vitamin C, you will get a vitamin C deficiency because your body's been trying to get rid of it for so long, and it will keep on doing that to the point where you may get scurvy. But so one way of measuring things is scientific, and that unfortunately we've been told so many lies that it's very hard to believe. Look at the current, we currently have a Home Secretary in this country, Suella Braverman, who resigned over ministerial misconduct under one Prime Minister, and then a week later came back. And one of her projects, and she's in the place to do this, is to raise the status of cannabis up to the status of heroin and cocaine, class A, as it's called here, which she wants to do. She thinks cannabis is this bad. At the same time, we have Joe Biden saying, well, we're going to forgive all federal prisoners who are there for possession of cannabis because, hey, it's not such a bad thing. So we then go, well, what do the experts say? What do the people who've researched this say? And we, come to somebody like, say, Carl Hart at Columbia University, who wrote Drug Taking for Grown-ups. I think that's what it's called. Something like, saying, oh, come on, let's stop this. Let's look at the real science. And this is a man who spent 20 years doing studies of drug taking. And he's saying the media they're just telling you nonsense. So there are things like that have become part of our culture, presumptions in our culture. And a lot of it leads to, if you don't believe what I believe, you're wrong. If, you're Jewish and I'm Muslim, or you're Buddhist and I'm Jain, or follow one of the Australian Aboriginal, my way of looking at it is right. And the problem has been so much, decade upon decade, that we have to create a world of tolerance as Isaiah Berlin said, the only thing we should be intolerant of is intolerance. We have to create a society where it isn't a war between my beliefs and your beliefs, as long as your beliefs or my beliefs don't lead to nastiness and damage. Then we need to rub along with each other and say, well, you want to believe in God, you don't want to believe in God, I don't mind. I'm happy to get on with your metaphor of how the universe goes on, as long as that leads you to be kind to people, as long as that doesn't lead you towards this, it seems to me, a society of increasing polarization, negativity, and attack. You know, you're either woke or you're fascist, and it's like, no, you know, I don't want to belong to a gang. And I think part of growing up is that point where you go, no, I'm not sure that my opinions are correct, but they are the best I have. That's where I've arrived at through my own thinking, rather than it being told to me by an authority what the truth is.
You're sort of pushing against this massive tide that's coming in from the ocean to do what you're talking about, because the power of the media and now the social media is so it's ubiquitous. It's just kind of hard to hold that central position.
But it's always been that way. If you look at the European wars of religion, where the Protestants and Catholics fought each other, these were horrific things. But you know, I'm currently rereading some Montaigne, which is set in the time of in the 16th century when these wars were happening, and you had this sensible man who sort of somehow managed to work out how to live despite the civil war that was raging around him. Of course, the Taoist philosophy, Lao Tzu, Zhangzi, that comes to us through a period of warfare. The Renaissance comes to us through a period of warfare. Wherever we go with human beings, there is this, you know, the great philosophical period in Greece, in Athens. The Athenians were performing genocides while inventing democracy, you know, and we have this fight. So I think what I'm saying is this environment has always been there. We're in it, and the way out of it is not to tell people what to do. The way out of it is to give accurate information and to teach people how to tell if information is accurate.
And that's something that we should start with sort of a younger crowd, I assume.
Yes, I mean, you know, I very much believe that we form our sort of life path in early adolescence, probably somewhere around the age of 13. And that life path comes from the culture that we're steeped in. So it doesn't come from our parents. It doesn't come from our teachers. It comes from the culture. So, you know, in each period, if what you are listening to is John Lennon, then you'll imagine no $200,000 piano. I grew up very much in the spirit of John Lennon, with the words that he spoke rather than the wealth that he possessed, and the influence he had, believing that we should have peace and love and all of that stuff. And I still believe that. I think that human society, if it has war and horror, war and hatred, will actually, you know, go badly wrong, because it has done at every stage. How we arrive at that point is another matter. If I then look at a generation that grew up during gangster rap, and I understand there were many reasons for Dr. Dre and Snoop Doggy Dogg, as he was before he dropped the doggy from his name. I can understand why they were aggrieved at what was happening around them, and that their artistic response makes sense. But when you look at a culture that is then inculcating gang warfare, and, you know, bringing about that this is the narrative you belong to, the enemy is white, or the enemy is black, or the enemy is Jewish, or the enemy is Christian, or the enemy is Palestinian, the enemy is Israeli. These imaginary communities that we give energy to become destructive to us. And so I do think the cultural formation happens then. That was a long preamble. As Judith Rich Harris, I think, showed in her books in the late 1990s, where she pulled apart the nature-nurture arguments, having written textbooks for a couple of decades herself, and so been up to date with the research, and said, well, actually, there are people giving misinformation, and the reality is we haven't proved a great deal of what is being asserted as true. And one of the things she came to is this thought that somewhere around 13 is when you make your cultural choices. She didn't go that next step of saying it'll be the songs you listen to, it'll be Rick and Morty on the TV or South Park or what have you. But that is the point that you have to get to people, that if they are going to have it as a life mission to develop themselves as adults, to be in charge of their own thinking to the extent we can be, to be able to check and verify information, and not to have the wool pulled over their eyes quite so easily. And I have a direction to go with this. I've been working on a curriculum for UK schools, also have some contact with a wonderful teacher in the US who's wanting to do a similar thing. And the idea is basically to make a course that's absolutely accessible and fun to do for 11 to 13-year-olds, and teach them about coercive control, about thought reform, about, you know, whatever words you want to use, about propaganda. And the first part of the course, which I've been diverted from because of reality. You remember reality? So,
I've heard about it. Yeah.
So I've actually just picked it up again after some months away from it. And I went back to, anybody who wants to look this up, it's on Wikipedia of all things, as if, called the Institute for Propaganda Analysis. In 1938, this institute put forward a series of points, and whereby we can have a look at what we're being told and become a little bit suspicious, what some people would call skeptical of what we're being told. And I took, some years ago, about 5 years ago, I went to the Anthony Pratt-Karnis, leading expert in psychology, the editor of Influence magazine, the co-author of the incredible Age of Propaganda, a wonderful book, very readable, you know, very jaw-dropping what he and Aronson found out. And I went to him and I said, I want to write something about, you know, how we can spot fake news and this kind of thing. And there's this Institute of Propaganda Analysis thing from 1938. And I thought, you know, he'll say, oh, that's so out of date. And he'll offer me something else, and I won't have to do the work to find it, you know. And he said, yeah, it's really good. Oh, okay. So I actually have gone back to that and worked through the points. And there are 7 points of analysis. You start with name calling. If somebody is being attacked, if that, you know, the ad hominem attack, if somebody as a source of information is being said, yeah, well, their socks are the wrong color, or, you know, some significant thing like this, or they're Jewish. And Mark, I feel such sympathy for anybody who is Jewish, that the amount of nonsense that circulates, that
it's even worse if you're Jewish and you're wearing the wrong color socks.
Yeah,
it's like a double whammy.
Yeah, Jewish with yellow socks, cross-gartered, yellow stockinged and cross-gartered, as Malvolio was. So you attack the source of the information rather than dealing with the information. Watch out for that one. The next one is glittering or glowing generalities, generalizations that stir us up, and you know, where, you know, we are the hardest working, the happiest, the most productive, the people in the world. Politicians are really good at throwing these around, and this is left, right, center, wherever you go, and it's horrible that The idea that, you know, and advertisers will do it. It's new, it's improved, it's fresh, it's organic. Even that's a word which in the UK is not in any way regulated. You can claim something's organic just because you feel like it. In fact, there's a shampoo called Organics, which is not in any way organic. It's actually a product of the chemical industry, as indeed most cosmetics are. They want you to think they're nice, but they're chemical industry. We then have transfer or association, where you're able to, for example, you have purr and snarl words, where there's a nice word like democracy, and there's a nasty word like fascism. And you can stir people emotionally with the greatest of ease using just words, nothing more. You can direct somebody's feelings towards something. You can, and Hitler was, you know, he was the absolute master of this. There's a set of photos that were published during the Third Reich, and they're photos that he had taken. He had a photographer with him from the 1920s right to his death, this one photographer. And this book shows him, and the photographs were taken in the 1920s before he came to power, and he's learning the postures that will attract people and show this strength. I mean, the particular one is this, which he would do, and you can see it in Leni Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will, where film of the 1934 Nuremberg rallies. He'd come to power finally, and he could, there are all sorts of so this ways of swaying listeners without actually giving them information. We then go on to testimonials and endorsements. That one's pretty straightforward. I found out in researching this that Taylor Swift was paid $26 million for her image to be used by Diet Coke for a year. That's $500,000 a week, just so that pictures of her standing by an enormous Diet Coke can. I mean, if you drank that much Diet Coke, you really would be in trouble. This is a drink that has absolutely no virtues. The only good thing in it is water. Yeah. Everything else in it, the diet stuff, the sugars they're using, are not the artificial sweeteners. They're not actually good for you. They may actually cause diabetes. And there we have it. And who's actually paying Taylor Swift? Well, the people buying the Diet Coke are paying Taylor Swift. So that, and she's very pretty and all of that. She's also very smart, and I would have hoped for better from her, I must say. But the endorsements, one of the ones I picked up along the way was the Pope. 2 popes, in fact, endorsed cocaine. Mariani wine. So I've got a picture here, actually. Hastens convalescence, especially after influenza. So Coke is good. Ronald Reagan, who was to become president of the United States, year in, year out, advertised Chesterfield cigarettes. I've got a big, Spike may drop this in. I don't know. I don't know if we want to share. The rapper, 50 Cent, was reckoned to be paid perhaps as much as $100 million for advertising vitamin water. Now, vitamin water, no studies, no virtues, it's just water. And bottled water is one of the most damaging environmental things we have, because transporting water in bottles costs a lot of energy. It's a tremendous waste of energy, because you can transport water in pipes, and it's less likely to have a bacterial infection in it if it comes out of your tap, if you're in such a country. Then we have the Kardashians, and we won't get into that. And just so many people who, this idea that because David Beckham was hired by Brill Cream to do hair products, and he shaved his head. Good for him, and they stopped paying him because they thought, that's not really fair, is it? But the thought that people would, because this copycat thing, because this, because John Travolta or Tom Cruise are in Scientology, I should try it out, because obviously Scientology is good for you because they're actors. And they're successful actors, so therefore. Oscar Pistorius is my personal favorite of all advertising, and he when he was working for Nike, this is the Paralympic runner whose legs end at his calves, and he is still in prison for shooting his girlfriend dead. I think her name was it Riva Steenkamp? One should remember her name rather than his. But the Nike only pulled their ad with Oscar Pistorius in it on the day he was found guilty in a South African court. And the ad says, "I am the bullet in the chamber. Just do it." Man who shot his girlfriend to death. Just do it. We then move on to ordinary people. The idea that, I'm just like you, and you should vote for me. And the thought of Donald Trump as a billionaire being like the people in the Rust Belt in any way, and having to live that kind of life. But there is that sense of becoming one of us, becoming part of the clan. Then you have the cherry picking, where only the information that supports what the person is saying is used. So there's a tremendous amount of this in, we see it, for example, in the anti-vax movement, that Andrew Wakefield, the dreadful, demonic, evil, go on, sue me, Wakefield, this person who was struck off as a doctor, because what he was actually up to was he wanted to sell his own measles vaccine. And he created the situation which led to the current anti-vax movement by trying to do that, by attacking the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine with 12 kids who he had specially chosen in a study which was completely false. The lab that did the testing was it was in Ireland. It's a complete mess on investigation. And he managed to persuade the world, or many, many people in the world, not to receive vaccinations during the COVID-19 threat. So he, this is by cherry picking information that he very carefully, and he got, again, testimonials. Robert De Niro and Jim Carrey both backed his campaign. We have the bandwagon, where people do things because the people around them are doing things. I'm rushing through these things. I'm not really intending to explain them here, because people won't do my course if I do. But the course is free, so I won't get any money. Hang on, done something wrong here. But the point is that there are simple ways of looking at information that will help kids. If they learn this early enough, they will review information in this way. Isn't it incredible that our school system does not teach how to break information down, how to evaluate information, how to put information back together, how to make sense of the world? It teaches geography and history and subjects which are very fascinating, but how to live in the world is what a child should be learning. And instead they're just being, our schools tend to be authoritarian in their notion. They don't tend to be democratic. And they tend to shape kids so that they'll be then ready to join the cancel culture and be woke, or join the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers or the KKK and be unwoke, or whatever the opposite of woke is, rather than being yourself, rather than being able to stand back and go, I'm going to go out and think about that. I'm going to read some stuff. I'm going to check that on Google and see what I come up with, rather than being led down rabbit holes into echo chambers, which is what is happening in a massive way in this generation.
Yes. So teaching kids critical thinking, and sort of borrowing a page from the great Midwest state in the United States of Missouri, where the sort of the saying is, "Oh yeah, show me." I look to that, and I look to within the system, there'll be pockets of rebellion. And that's where we can look to for hope and push back against such incredible, I've never seen things like it, or maybe I just wasn't aware of it, incredible disinformation and mind control on, on a level of hundreds of millions of people. So
looking at the Russian propaganda machine, and
that's what I was thinking of when I just said that. Yeah.
The way that Russian TV was pulled to the state, and where under the Soviet leadership, any criticism of the state, any comedy, would put you in prison. With Dugin around to help advise, they've gone the other way, and they actually, in fact, Dugin himself, who's a national Bolshevik, that was his political party, national coming from National Socialist, of course. And so he wanted to bring together the best of Stalin and Hitler. And this man is a senior advisor to Putin. I'm not kidding. So you have this situation where, I mean, there are a number of really good books about the Russian propaganda machine. And in Russia today, although there is still access to international media among Russians, I think that the majority of Russians really do believe that the Ukraine is a Nazi country, even though its premier is Jewish, and that they have to stop this, that this fear has been inculcated and grown. I hope that there are also a lot of Russians, and I have friends in Russia, I hope there are also a lot of Russians who are questioning this view of reality, but it shows how a view of reality can be created, just as Goebbels was able to create a view of reality for the German people, so that they accepted the atrocities that were being committed in their name. So we see this in Russia. Now, I wanted to say that you don't actually need a guru to tell you how to think for yourself. This is a conundrum. All you need to do is decide that you want to think for yourself and start doing it. It isn't impossible, but it means stepping back, and it means, if you want to know about something, in Scientology, we read Adele Davis, How to Eat Right to Keep Fit. That was the most popular title. It later proved in a court case that all of her learned references at the back of her books, she just hired a team of people to create them. She didn't read them. She just wanted every paper on B vitamins listed to make it look as if, and the reason she was in court was because somebody had died following her advice. And it basically came out that she was a charlatan. When I left Scientology, having been given all this stuff about taking enormous amounts of vitamins, just, 60 pills a day, I've seen people taking, been there when that happened, that are of no value to you whatsoever. They're in fact potentially a little upsetting, if you start getting into huge quantities of these things. But so having been in that culture, I came away and said, well, how do I find out what's best to think? And something very simple happened. I went, well, what about if I found a professor of nutrition? What about if I found somebody whose work is considered to be good? And I read that. And I found it was a professor from one of the London universities, and I read a book. And that didn't tell me everything about nutrition, but it did tell me what the scientific consensus was at the moment. And, I've updated that. I'm actually reading Tim Spector, who's a professor of genetic epidemiology, King's College, isn't that fancy, at King's College in London, who arranged the COVID study, which nearly 5 million people participated in. So he's really good. He's done lots of twin studies over the years, and he's come to all sorts of notions about nutrition, which are supported by evidence. And so if there was just a study of 20 people, he'll say, well, you know, if that were true, then. But where he's got a gold standard study of 1,000 people that's been replicated with another gold standard, he says, well, this seems to be pretty sure. So, for example, and here's an interesting thought, he studied obesity for 3 decades and more. And so he's studied identical twins and fraternal twins, non-identical twins, in their thousands. And he has found that the predisposition towards obesity is genetic. Now, it's a predisposition, but if you take identical twins who they're adult, one of them is an absolutely strict vegan, and the other eats McDonald's every day, they will tend to be about the same weight. And that's a way of investigating a problem is obesity, and saying, is this the fault of the greedy person, or is there a predisposition? There is a predisposition. His other work is into the microbiome, the stuff living in our guts, which makes up about half of the cells in our body, the various bacterial cells and fungal cells and viral cells that we have functioning in our bodies. And saying, well, you can actually alter obesity by altering metabolism, which you do by changing the microbiome. And he can point to many successful studies showing that this is so. We see here a cultural thing where there's a determination fat people are fat because they eat too much. It's because they're greedy. It's because they have no self-control. It's because they have no willpower. And he's going, no, it's because they're on the wrong food, that, you know, and the diets they're doing are probably, you know, he's pretty much against the concept of dieting. So the point is that I wanted to know what the conventional idea is, having had the unconventional idea. And then I want to find out, you know, how to look more deeply. There's a very good book by Ben Goldacre, who's a medical doctor, called Bad Science, in which he shows how the media will abuse statistics. It's a slightly patronizing text, I must say. It told me a fair amount of things that I already knew as if I didn't. But I can get over that, you know, being irritated by being talked down to, because what he is saying is highly relevant, that we need better ways of assessing information. That first thing is test the authority. Where is it coming from? What profit is the authority making? What background does the authority on this subject have? What disagreements are there with this authority? How, you know, it depends how deep you want to go, but the information is there, rather than rabbit hole echo chamber, some lunatic who says tomatoes are poisonous, which of course they aren't. Tomatoes are very good for you. And I should know, because I grow loads of them. And look how incredibly healthy I am. Anecdotal info.
I think from ages around 12 or 13, 14, I think if we can get some of that which we were discussing today, to get kids to be thinking along those lines, and have that natural to them, and to have that is something that they feel good about. It's like, oh yeah, show me, really. You know, you go on Twitter and you see someone with 100 million followers and they say something. It doesn't mean that that's a gold standard of in truth. So especially as, you know, conspiracist theories abound and people lose touch with reality, maybe we'll look to the youth to bring us back.
Yeah, and I that's all, you know, that's what we that's where we should head. That, and it's not the idea of getting everybody so that they can be completely rational all the time. It is leaning toward the light, as you say, putting up the guide rails and saying, well, let's help kids to think better. And at the other end, in our society, we have to find some way of not putting predators into power over us. You know, we have, you know, it's, again, growing up, becoming mature and going, we deserve better leaders. And in this, you know, my friend Ira Chalef's work on courageous followership and how to challenge a leader, how to say, no, that's not a good idea. You know, in invading Cuba through the Bay of Pigs, the standard example of groupthink, but what a stupid idea that was. And the idea that nobody wanted to tell John F. Kennedy that it was a stupid idea because it would work somehow because of Camelot and the magic of Kennedy and what have you. And it was a dreadful fiasco. So, and part of it is also inequality, the idea that other people are more clever than I am, and I'll just do what they say. And of course, if somebody, you know, like Tim Spector is an expert on genetic epidemiology, I will look to his views, but I will want to understand them. I will want to go, you know, when I come up against some idea that doesn't seem right to me, I want to check it. There's something else I want to say, which is about, you know, because checking information doesn't necessarily, you know, we live in an age of discord where the Russian and the Chinese have been shown to be, and I'm sure other people as well, have been shown to be performing what are called psyops, psychological operations, which, so you get something like QAnon coming along, and of course the Russians are like, yeah, throw money at it, keep it going, this is brilliant, cause as much discord, as much confusion, as much hatred within the society.
Let them destroy themselves.
Yes.
We don't need tanks to take on the United States. Let people who have no guardrails, whose imaginations are maybe unchecked, let them serve to rise and destroy the society from within, and we didn't have to send any troops over there at all.
Yeah, divide and conquer. And we are living in perilous times. I recently read a book called The War on the West by Douglas Murray, and it was pointed out to me that he is what is called a right-wing commentator. He's a member of the Conservative Party here. He writes for The Spectator, which is a Tory, though I must say our Labour and Tory parties are neither left nor right. They're not even necessarily very good for anything. They're bland and not trustworthy, self-serving, but they're not left and they're not right. But anyway, he's a supporter of the Tory party, and he's supported neoconservatism, which is a philosophy that I abhor, along with neoliberalism, another philosophy that I abhor. But he does point out that we should make a comparison of the major societies in the world and see which direction we want to go. Do we want to be like Russia? No. Where, you know, 300,000 conscripts are suddenly pulled into the army to throw them at Ukraine. They've already lost more people, more lives in Ukraine than they did through the whole of the Afghan war. You know, they've passed the 15,000 mark. So they're throwing people's lives away. So would you like to live in the Russian system? Not really. Would you like to live in the Chinese system, where they still have what they call brainwashing camps, Sinal, not me calling it that. And it certainly wasn't Edward Hunter, for anybody who's been deceived into that particular myth. He wasn't the first to use the term brainwashing in English. It was the Times of India in January 1950, where the term was first used after representatives of the Indian government had visited China and were terrified by what they saw there. So do we want a system where 1 million people in Xinjiang can be put into concentration camps, their language and their culture taken from their children, who are taught then, you know, to be part of the Han Chinese culture? Do we want that culture, or do we want the Western culture? Those are the three choices at the moment. And while the Western culture has tremendous faults, we need to deal with predators. We need to stop putting them in charge of us, these awful criminal types. We need to understand propaganda better. But the reality is that we are living And we then have the third world. Would you rather live in India? Would you rather live in Brazil? Would you rather live in Africa? As Churchill said of democracy, it's a dreadful system, something like that. Spike will give us the exact words, but it's better than anything else that we've had. And I think the same is true in the West, that Western culture now, which is falling apart through hatred and dissent and opposition and populism and these kind of things, that it is nonetheless the system that has had the longest lifespans for its citizens, the best health, the best education. And it's far short of what it could be. It could be a lot better. But go and take a look at Russia and China, take a look at South Africa and how things are working there, where you have Eurocentrism and, again, a polarized politics where the ANC and Inkatha will never agree. Look at the Arab countries. Look all over the world, see which system, and then think about how we can improve the system we have and protect ourselves from the psychological operations, the disruption that we have all too readily participated in. In QAnon, as a maybe it was General Michael Flynn who started it. I don't know, on 4chan and all of that. But the Russians have certainly jumped in gleefully that anything that rips American society apart strengthens Russia, which is no longer militarily capable of, I don't think ever was militarily capable of taking the US on, though they do have short-range nuclear missiles, and we tend to have got rid of most of ours, I think. Not a good idea to use them, I don't think, personally.
I guess I could say at this point, good luck to the 7 or so billion people out there, and we'll do our best to build a few guardrails and check the power of the of massive disinformation spewings.
And one last point, which I wrote on my little yellow pad while we were talking. I strongly believe that politicians should be held accountable for what they say, especially if they say it on the floor of the House or the Senate or
maybe
Parliament.
Lawsuits could play a part in that. I know.
Well, I think there's a simple thing that if you can demonstrate that a politician lied, that is to say they knowingly deceived people, they should be barred from politics for a certain period of time automatically, even if it was only a year. But it should be known and they should be removed. So when Margaret Thatcher told the people on the floor of the House of Parliament that the Belgrano ship, Argentinian ship, had been inside the exclusion zone, that was a lie. She knew it was a lie. 800 lives were lost as a consequence of that. And she should no longer have been Prime Minister. So I think, in the same way that in this country, an officer of the court, a lawyer, they are permanently under oath. Anything they say in court is said as if they were under oath. So they can be charged with perjury. I believe this is true. They can be charged with perjury if they have lied to a judge. And I think that should be a standard for politicians too, that there should be a high standard of truth. And, that might help a little, going a little towards a society that believes more in facts and not alternative facts.
We certainly need some ideas like that.
Yeah. And when we invite our gorgeous, wonderful audience, who are the very best people in the world, frankly. You are lovely, all of you. We'll invite you all to comment and discuss this among yourselves. I'd like to see that. I'd like to see great long comment sections where people are, and I wouldn't have to do all of this sitting around pontificating. Other people could do it for me. Somebody said, I did a piece on narcissism, which I do have very determined opinions about. I think it's a stupid word for what it's meant to describe. But I had a conversation about narcissism with Chris Shelton. Somebody put in the comments, "Oh, John Atack just oozes narcissism." And sadly, Spike had pulled the comment before I could respond and say, could you define narcissism, and I'll see how oozy I can be about it. It's like, isn't it lovely, the world in which we live? But the comment section, please, and also put $1 in the box for Patreon, so that Spike will be able to afford her humble living. And it's always a delight and a pleasure talking with you, Mark. It really is. It's been great.
Absolutely, John. Thank you for that. And hopefully that will spark some ideas in people, and maybe they'll hear some of the things that we were saying, and they'll say, no, that's not right. And that's good.
Yes.
I think the point is, as we wrap up here, is just critical thinking, whether it's on the left or the right or holding the center, in whatever country, whatever age group, is something that I would, we would encourage.
We would encourage it, absolutely. And looking at the ways that rationality is undermined through emotion, through appeals to emotion, which and we have Yuval Lao's fascinating presentation about all belief and fervor on the channel, and his book will one day appear. But understanding that we are drawn, I've cited Jill Bolt Taylor elsewhere, who was a Harvard neuroscientist, words to the effect that we believe that we are thinking animals that feel, but the reality is we are feeling animals that think, and we will tend to use our cleverness to buttress our stupidity. That's the way I look at it. I certainly use my cleverness to buttress my stupidity whenever.
Well, I think that's really well said. And I would also say that we each, and I'm mostly thinking of myself as I'm working on this film, based on my first book, Taking Me for a Ride, Coming of Age,
which you can get free on the internet.
Which is free on one of the first free books on the internet, but in Project Gutenberg. But I guess I think that it's very important for me, as I'm observing myself, as I'm critical of systems, as I'm critical of others, it's important for me not to become that which I'm criticizing. And that's, I don't know, maybe I'm a narcissist, maybe I'm not, I don't see myself, but that's important for me not to become the narcissists that I'm criticizing. So
and that is a matter of it's difficult, isn't it? Because good people have a much harder time in the world than bad people when it comes to politics and leadership, because they question themselves and they have remorse and conscience, and they worry that what they're saying might not be absolutely true, and often they're drowned therefore in all the noise and screeching that's coming out.
And their message never gets through. It's the people who are certain that captures people's they're the ones who get the votes.
Yeah, they take our attention, and it's happened again and again and again that, just looking at the recent elections in the Philippines, and I thought Duterte was bad, that my only crime is the extrajudicial killing. You had a president of a country saying that the only crime he'd committed was murdering people. Kind of going, yeah, that is probably a crime. But then he gets, a member of the Marcos family takes over from him. It's like, what is happening in the world? Don't you people know what his ancestors did in this country? The amount of shoes Imelda Marcos collected, biggest amount of shoes collected, just terrible. But yes,
I think it's high time that we put the shoe on the other foot.
Yes, all of them,
all 2,000 of them, or however many there were, and hope for a better future. Maybe that's my imagination coming out, but hopefully it's maybe there's some rationality there as well.
I think there is, and I think there is a tremendous. We can have tremendous hope, if not optimism. We can have tremendous hope. We have all the tools we need to have a wonderful human society on this planet. We have everything we need to do that. And the problem
the problem is the aggregation of power. Yes, it's too much in some places, and then that power builds systems that propagates itself. And I think that's why we can't educate the young folks, because our systems have been built by the history of those power structures. But
yes,
where there's voice, there's hope.
yeah. And where there's life, there's dope. Oh no, hang on.
What did you call me?
Well, I would never call you that. You know, I just wouldn't call you that. No.
Like, man, like, whoa,
Yeah.
Jim, like,
Dave.
like,
Dave's not here.
Whoa, Jim. Shit. If it doesn't fit, shit.
Yeah, back to Cheech and Chong. It was another time. Oh, and there's a puppy. Look, there's a puppy wagging a tail. What a gorgeous animal.
And the dog's good looking too.
Yeah, and the dog is. Yeah, that's so true. So you're going to go away from this knowing that how gorgeous you are, and that's got to be a good thing. What sparked my comment at the beginning was seeing the strange case of Donald Trump. What's the name of the doctor who Spike will have it for us.
Dr. Seuss.
Dr. Seuss. She was thrown out of the American Psychiatric Association for doing a diagnosis of Trump. And
is that Lindy Lee or something?
Why is her name not coming to us? I've got a copy of the book over there. I'm very tempted to go and look at it. But somebody had actually, in a comment section, she does a thing called the town hall, which I had the privilege of being on for 7 minutes, and my 7 minutes of fame. And somebody had put in the comments how beautiful she was. Now, she's an attractive woman, but it did hit me. It's like, I've got to tell Mark how beautiful he is, because this is so sexist, you know.
And don't forget Astra here.
Yeah, what a looker, eh? Oh, I don't know. Well, it's been very interesting as ever, and
power to the people.
Yeah, power to the people. The police, and what's it? The God Save the Queen and the fascist regime. Only it's God Save the King now. So what are the Sex Pistols going to rhyme with that? The ones of them that remain alive. It's been great.
It's been real.
It's been real, man.
It's been imaginary.
Yeah.
Like, for sure.
We have been an imaginary community for an hour.
So mellow.
Mellow, man.
Like, whoa, Jim. Man.
Oh, well. So back to Vermont for you. And or reality, it's also known. And we will meet again on the other side of the bridge that you've just sold me.
And I look forward to that.
Cheers, Mark.
All right.
Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.
Well, I would never call you that. You know, I just wouldn't call you that.
If it doesn't fit,